How's everybody doing in the live chat? I have with me Dani Katz, known author and of the book Word Up, and I think also Yes I Am, if that's not correct.
That's correct.
And then also you have your website Quantum Languaging. So I'm glad to have you here for a conversation. Just to remind the live chat how it goes, we usually go about 15 minutes having an isolated conversation between me and Dani, and then we go to the live chat. But how rude of me. Let's speak to a few people in the live chat before we dive in. Okay, Dani?
Sure.
All right. So let's see who was in here first. Victoria, Pandora, how are you doing? We have Miss Ravioli. Yes, please hit the like button. And I'm cautious to say share now after being listening to some of your interviews. So please please spread the information, subscribe, and turn on all the notifications. Thank you, Miss Ravioli. We have Lindsay H, Deaf Operator, and Fernando. So not to take up too much of your time, I want to hop right into the conversation. Instead of me giving your bio, how about you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Ooh, okay. Thanks for having me on, first and foremost. I love your show so much.
I appreciate that.
A little bit about me. I mean, I use word witch as an umbrella term because I play with words in such a deep, mystical, multidimensional way. I started off as a journalist. I got a master's degree in journalism from USC. And then I wrote for the LA Weekly for 9 years. So it just put me in this relationship with words where I was just, wrestling with them and tussling them with them. And I went through a deep sort of shamanic period, a lot of like journeys and initiations. And during that time, I just developed a different relationship with words where I started to see the effects they were having on the people. They were, the people who were receiving the words, the people who were reading the words. I could just kind of see what the words were doing to them and the larger implications they were having on their lives. And so what I realized is the words were showing me, their coding, their frequencies, and how they were operating as reality creation technology, not just as communication technology. And so through, writing so much and just being exposed to words so much, they kept calling me into a deeper and deeper relationship until finally around 2017, I just kind of surrendered and was like, all right, I'm of service to you, language. I will do what you want me to do. And even though I had been doing quantum languaging videos for a few years at that point, that's when I really jumped in full force and just gave myself over in service to the language. And just helping to evolve it as a means of helping to evolve the species.
Okay, so just right off the bat, because we have an honest conversation, you watch the show.
Yep.
And we use the term witch, not a lot, but often. And that could be off-putting to some people when they hear that word, and knowing that you're cautious of how you choose your words and you write books about it. Do you do that purposely?
No, you know what? Again, when it comes to describing what I do, it's always, extra effort to find the right words to describe it. And which is really the right word. I understand that it has negative implications, which is why it's not you're not going to see it on the front page of my website per se. Right. But just in terms of me having a more mystical, alchemical relationship with reality, it just seems like the most appropriate term. I could say word mystic. It doesn't really flow. It's not really as fun to say.
And phonetically, right, is what you're saying with the alliteration there. Is that why part of the reason why you chose?
Well, I think
I'm just curious. I'm just curious because you're actually talking about words. So
yeah. Because it just feels like it's more accessible. Like quantum languaging consultant, it's so opaque.
Not only that, but you'll probably get mistaken for some kind of tech position instead of linguistic. I would say. I mean, with the quantum languaging, it would just you would just get lost in the shuffle by using that term. No, I'm just asking because um, seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Of course.
Just to understand like what was the mindset behind that term. But I don't want to get stuck right there. But I know a lot of people that listen to my content might get hung up on that word. So I'm playing. I just give you a little information about the show. Often I play the contrarian, just so we don't get into a echo chamber.
Yep.
So just I know that will probably come up like, oh, he's talking to a witch, that kind of thing.
So, I get it. I mean, right. Anthony Roberts in the comments, he gets it. I'm a good witch.
Okay. So if that's the case, are we all participating? Well, I'm not going to ask that question because I'm aware of, thanks to Brother Unplug Him, he's the one that really got me into the words, like understanding the power behind the words and the spell, that kind of thing. With language arts, spelling actually being, how we write words. How does that all connect?
It all connects in that, from my perspective, language is the most powerful technology we have on the planet. And people don't understand, the sort of multidimensional implications of every single word that we use. So yes, like from that sense, our words cast spells because every word we say either creates, destroys, or sustains the status quo. So there are, people in positions of power who definitely understand these tools. I know a lot of what you talk about is, propaganda and the war of language and how language is being weaponized and how, the interesting thing with language is that, in terms of like the social engineers, it's that it's a tool that we use against ourselves and we end up doing the work for them by programming ourselves and programming one another and programming our reality construct all day, every day without understanding the implications of our words.
Mm. So what you're saying is, just to fully understand you, they understand the power of words and then they shape our reality starting with the word.
I believe like our reality definitely begins with the word. It says in the Bible, the word was with God and the word was God.
Correct.
So I believe that they do know what they're doing. And when I examine language, I'm always curious of like, was it ever pure? Like, was it, and when was it co-opted? Or did the English language sort of start out as a means of manipulation? And I don't really know the answer to it, but it's very clear the way that words are being weaponized and used against us. It seems like the social engineers know what they're doing and understand this power.
Okay, I can agree with that. I just like to ask questions so you can fully articulate for people that may be beginners in understanding or waking up or whatever you want to, however you wanted to define that term, of becoming aware of everything is not happenstance. It's just things just don't randomly happen. It's a lot of shaping going on in society. So I would like to bring up where we're at on time. So you said a lot there, so I want to know where I want to jump in at. You said the beginning of the English language. So is it down to the letters themselves? Because I often speak about sigils and we know the powers of runes and those things. Do you go to that level or do you just stay macro?
I personally stay macro. I have not been sucked into that level yet, but I do. I know like in Gematria, in Hebrew, there are different languages where each letter is its own sigil and is its own symbol. And I also know that in, I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Keys of Enoch, but in that book, they map each of the body's amino acids each one is imprinted with a different Hebrew letter. I'm not at that place in my studies yet at all.
Okay, I was just curious because I've watched several of your interviews just so I would be prepared, and I read like thumb through your books online. Yeah, so let's maybe go over to the live chat. I know you addressed some things there. Let's see. Fernando says, "How about the curse of knowledge is predictive programming?" You want to maybe address that?
Well, I don't know what the curse of knowledge is.
Okay. I guess he's referring to our understanding, our being conscious. Um, I think that's what he means by the curse. Maybe from eating the fruit in the Garden of Eden, if I'm understanding that question correctly. But
I
yeah,
mean, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No. Go ahead.
I mean, I can't speak specifically about the curse of knowledge per se, but in terms of predictive programming, like for anyone who's tracking reality the way you seem to be tracking reality, Mo, the same way I seem to be tracking, it's just, you can hear the repetition of the words. Like you can hear words just slipping in, through the media to understand where they're trying to steer us. It's all, it's all right there. They're not very shy about it.
You made a awesome observation there by saying slip in. I'll notice a term and it'll just stand out. It's like it's awkwardly placed.
Yep.
And then you'll hear that term again in a different area, arena, maybe online, maybe just in conversation. Or you'll hear it somewhere else in the media. And then you'll notice it starts to pick up in social media usage and then also conversation. Would you like to walk us through that path? Because you're a journalism major by trade. Is that by design as well? Are words picked out oh, this is going to be the hot word for the season, and then rolled out to the masses? How does that work?
I think it is. I mean, I don't work for Bain and Company or any of the other sort of globalist marketing arms, but it does seem like it does because you just start to hear these words. And there are two different places that I see it. So one is, and I teach about propaganda to high school students. And so I've created this term egregious associations, which is where the media tries to link things that really have no natural linkage. Someone who voted for Trump would necessarily be an anti-vaxxer or a racist or a white supremacist, or if someone who's, questions the JFK assassination, they're a conspiracy theorist, therefore they're automatically a flat earther. There's that linking, right, of flat earther, conspiracy theorist, anti-vaxxer, conspiracy theorist. So there are those associations. So I think that's one way that they do it is you can't say one without the other. I remember when they first started fake news, when that term started to emerge, and anytime I saw them covering it on the mainstream, it would be associated with an image of Pizzagate or an image of pizza. So it was linking that in people's minds. We're talking about fake news. So you have to also associate, Pizzagate with fake news. But then there are other words like privilege, which is so toxic at this point. It's just lost all meaning. And that's one that I feel like they probably did lay that in, and it's definitely been weaponized. And it's loaded with so many little linguistic viral landmines that it does so much damage with every utterance. I feel it a lot about I don't say COVID or any of those words because I feel as we articulate them and allow them to dance on our tongues, we're playing into whatever sort of dark arts they're trying to foist upon us. So I do feel there are certain words that they'll hone in, toxic masculinity. That was one. So yeah, I feel they do pinpoint certain words or phrases to kind of lay them in as little linguistic viruses that operate to control us and enslave us.
And to jump in where you said about fake news. So fake news was actually created by the mainstream media. and they were going to try to leverage it against 45 Savage, aka Donald Trump. But he actually hijacked it and turned it against them. You also see the same thing with the Let's Go Brandon phenomenon. It was actually a cover up, for what they actually were saying, and then once again it was re-leveraged to be one hell of a social media trend / meme. So we can see how these things can go left by their terms being hijacked as well.
Yes, exactly. And it gives me hope because it just shows us how many people are onto them and are onto their trickery. So every time we take one of their phrases back, it kind of pulls a little bit of air out of their agenda.
Okay. So I had a question that we missed. This is from Ned. He says, can the speaker break down what she's accomplished with biblical worldview?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I don't have a biblical worldview. To be honest, I haven't read the Bible. I've read like little pieces of it. And I don't ascribe to any one sort of like system of worship. I think there's value in all of them. So I'm just basically a do unto others kind of gal.
Okay. I see where you're coming from. And that's funny that you haven't read the Bible. Thanks, Dan, for that question. But that those words that you quoted have crossed over into everyday vernacular, as what you were saying, where in the beginning was the Word, and he was with the Word, and he was the Word, right? So if I paraphrase that, but it's just awesome how something can be written thousands of years ago and could be siloed, can creep over into everyday terminology.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's so much power to that. Like every time I read that statement, I feel like it's such a gift to our species. Like, pay attention. Our word is God, and it's so powerful. And I think there's so many truths that come from the Bible, come from, the Mahabharata, come from all these different traditions, but we get stuck in our identity constructs. Like, I was raised Jewish, so my parents, it wasn't just kind of a neutral thing. It was like, why would you read the Bible? And I feel like that's a program in and of itself. Like, well, why wouldn't I? Like, there's value to be found everywhere.
Okay. And I'll bring this up. I haven't brought it up on in public for public consumption, but with private conversation with people, there's going to be this XY kind of graph of believers, non-believers, maybe on the X, and good and bad on the Y. And you're going to have certain, I think the work that you're trying to do is good. And you said it yourself, is good. And it's dismantling this huge infrastructure called media. It's going to take many hands to do it. So I think we can't get hung up on people's titles, because it's just, I can vibe with and I know this start off as a question, but it's more of a statement. I can vibe with people that listen to my content, and they'll get hung up on the word witch. I'm just going to be 100% honest with you. But we have to look also at who your enemy is, who my enemy is. And this is a system of media that's actually using witchcraft, and I use that term purposely because the definition of witchcraft is control. So to say all that to that, how can you separate, or how can we separate terms like witch, and then but also understanding the difference between that and witchcraft?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I think I'm in the practice of consistently deprogramming myself. And, we're all programmed. And for as much deprogramming as I've done, I still have plenty more deprogramming to do. So for me, it's a constant practice of self-reflection of, if I'm going to have a knee-jerk contraction towards someone, or I'm going to reject someone who I don't know and I haven't met them based on like an identifier. This is the problem with identifiers and labels. And it's interesting because I very rarely, like, I call myself a word witch to my friends. But it's interesting that I chose to do that with you. And it's also interesting that you're taking it into this conversation because this is the problem with labels.
And that's why I'm harping on it. I'm not harping on it because what you choose to call yourself. I don't do that to anyone, even just when it's people that are, from whatever they request. I mean, if you want to be called something or acknowledged as something, that's your choice. Because if I try to change you, then I'm engaging in witchcraft by my own definition. I'm trying to control how you identify yourself.
Yeah.
So you see, we get into this ball of wax of control is the real issue instead of turning that force inward and changing ourselves what we can change. Would you like to add to that or?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, and it's interesting to look at, like, it's a perfect example of how language is used as a control mechanism and as a means of creating more separation amongst us. And this is the issue with like all labels and all identifiers is they put us in a box. And when we're in a box, there's what's in the box and what's outside of the box. And, that creates this fragmentation. And it's, this is an unraveling that's going to take us, multiple generations to finally evolve beyond. But it's interesting to notice how labels, just like these automatic stereotypical identifications that we have with them, and they keep us trapped and they keep us from really connecting. And mostly right now, they're keeping us from unifying and realizing that like we as citizens are not each other's issues. It's like the larger control mechanisms that are trying to pit us against one another. And these labels are a means of doing it. For me, just to tie it up is like, I'm not a maiden, I'm not a mother, and I'm not a crone. So when it comes to the three established archetypes for a woman, I don't exist on this planet.
Can you stop right there? I want to stop you right there. So can you repeat those three and maybe give us maybe a little description for each three? Just because I can seek first to understand, then to be understood.
Yes, of course. Okay. So in whatever has informed my worldview, there are three different archetypes for women. There's the maiden, right? The young woman who's not yet hit motherhood. Then there's the mother archetype. And then there's the crone archetype.
And the
crone is an older woman. But there's a hole in there. Like for women like me, we don't really have an identifier. And it's like in my own life path, I've realized, I guess I'm probably the witch. And for me, what witch means is like a lot of my work is in the unseen realms, and I'm working alchemically and always in highest service to humanity, of course. But like for me, there's a lot of, kind of mystical work. And
can I stop you right there?
Yeah.
And I've been Facts family, I have been working on interrupting or interjecting, but I had to stop you right there because you said the crone.
Yep.
So this crone, wow, I got to get my thoughts together. So the crone is often depicted in movies as the aunt that shows up, this mysterious lady. She, and the daughter kind of gravitates towards her other than the mother. Have you noticed this archetype? I've never heard that term, but I know exactly what you mean when you said that. That, like I said, it's portrayed out into media as like, the woman that saw the world as where the mother would stay, grounded to the husband or the life of the family. Have you seen that archetype?
I have seen that archetype, and I think that's what in my mind I'm associating with the witch archetype, because the crone is like, she's the elder, right? Like she's kind of past her prime, so to speak, and I think that's another enslavement construct that I don't really buy into. So you can't see me, but I'm making quote marks with my fingers.
Right.
But I think that's the archetype that I identify with, that kind of like more woman of the world who's not really attached to like one singular nuclear family. And according to our cultural mythologies, and every culture is shaped by their myths,
Mm.
I haven't really existed. So that's why I, for myself, have kind of cozied up to the term witch, because it's like, oh, okay, there's some archetype I can kind of relate to on this planet.
So is that why? Wow, you just oh man, because it's all coming together now. Because I've used the term auntie, right? This
Yep.
auntie or this aunt, which sounds like you're talking about the crone, and in this milieu, as we will call it, manifestation is a big part of it. It's all coming together now, and it's just I'm trying to get my head around it. So you have these women that have chosen school or some kind of craft over motherhood, right?
Right.
That gave them monetary freedom, in some aspects of it. And along with that, monetary freedom, they are looked up to by the younger generations. Like, I'm not going to go my mother's route. So I'm going to go aunt's route,
right,
auntie. So, but it's just, and now this manifestation thing is starting to brew in that milieu as well. You're starting to hear it of, as, and I'm going somewhere with this. Just bear with me. I'm having a stream of consciousness right now. As the financial market is tightening down.
Yep.
As the inflation, those kind of things, this independence is being lost because it's, as you know, it's harder for a single person to live in it than a couple, just because of the economics behind it. And you're hearing the words manifestation more and more. Did any of that make sense, or?
It did make sense. I mean, here's what I'm getting from what you're saying is that, and again, my worldview is what it is.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it feels like there's a squeeze and a crunch happening here in the 3D reality, and in relying on the system and in following the sort of predetermined formula for making money. Whereas I'm moving through the world kind of between the cracks and like, well, let me work with energy, and let me work with the frequencies of words, and let me call on different sources to resource myself, instead of doing it the way that the system tells me I need to do it. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Thank you. Thank you for saying that so eloquently. Because what I'm seeing is just, no, because when you said that word, it identifies what is colloquially called the auntie.
Mm-hmm.
That, and this is what you see in a Kamala Harris. This is what you see in these women of power. But what they're doing is they're using it as a mechanism to draw young women or women of that age into that mindset of negativity.
Mm-hmm.
You see, if you notice, all the people they put up now are represented by that milieu. To say, if you want to be like us, do this. This is how you gain power. This is how you manipulate, that kind of thing. So I just want to get hung up right there. It's just, I never heard that term before. But it perfectly explains what I believe is the line of attack towards society. That's one of the ways they turn it on themselves.
Well, yeah, and I think it's also interesting because you have, there's all this hype about like, we need more women in power and patriarchy's the problem, and that, which is not my trip at all. Mm-hmm. And then you have these women in power who are still acting out the masculine shadows. Like they're not embodying any sort of actual feminine leadership in terms of like capital F feminine versus capital M masculine. So there's like the optics of there being positive change, but it's all being driven by the same patriarchal shadows, right? That same like divide and that kind of violent languaging and this us them thing. Whereas like the capital F feminine is more inclusive, right? Mm-hmm. And is going to have a different, more allowing, like softer approach to things. But this quote unquote, it's not progress. Like that's just straight up propaganda doublespeak. Like what
And we're right here on it. That's the thing. We're right here on it because they use that maybe insecurity of when you invest in another person. There's always some doubt there, and it's like, well, empower yourself, and this is where you do it. Accept globalism. Let's cut to the chase. It's like live this lifestyle, accept globalism, where that means an app can replace anything for any gender. I mean, because if you think about it, all the roles that are assigned to each gender can be done by app now. And that's what they kind of want to do, is drive that wedge in and say, okay, we can provide everything as long as you buy into the system.
Yes, exactly. But what is the one thing that none of these apps can provide? Care, compassion, love, connection, all the like. And when I say feminine qualities, I'm talking about the like larger metaphysical polarities. I'm not talking about men and women at all.
Right.
But what's, again, like going back to the optics of progress, when it's like, this is patriarchy on steroids, the fact that they're attempting to engineer a society where there's no love, there's no compassion, there's no connection, there's no, like these things that make us human is what they're trying to pull out of the world. And then they're trying to like put these people in charge who happen to have vaginas, so we're supposed to call it like a win for feminism. It's so backwards. Like no one's winning.
But that's the goal.
That's the goal.
If you subscribe to my way of thinking, at the end of the day, depopulation is the goal. And
of course it's the goal.
And the miscommunication between the genders causes conflict and causes people to accept that they can't cohabitate with the opposite gender. Like almost to the point where we're speaking two different languages. Not me and you, but when a man and a woman have a random conversation, there's no connectivity there because you shape the conversation and how you hear it, not what's being said. So if there's no understanding there, mutual understanding there can't be anything else there.
Oh, of course not. And I feel like, unfortunately, a lot like people who are buying into it, right? Because there's like people who are taking the bait and who are mind controlled. And the people who are mind controlled are buying into this idea that like men are bad and men are the enemy. And so there's this kind of like chip, it's like there's a kind of collective chip on not all women's shoulder, but like according to this particular narrative. And then that comes in, but you can see the exact same fragmentation if we're playing out the like black-white conversation or the Muslim Jew conversation or the Republican Democrat. It's going to be the same sort of rift and that same unwillingness to hear one another. And it's not organic, right? It's just like this, like that's the real virus, is the illusion of division and the illusion that we are in conflict with one another. And I think that's the most dangerous thing we have going on. And we wouldn't even be here right now if they weren't so successful with the identity nonsense over the past 10 years. And that, like, I see that all as like kind of seeding the groundwork that allowed them to come in and pull off what they're attempting to pull off now, which I don't think they will pull off, but I wish it hadn't gotten this far. It's shouldn't have gone this far.
Well, it's gotten this far because, just to step away from the gender conversation, but to another binary conversation, is the pro and anti-Vaseline, as we like to say around here, which that is, I believe, is the wrong conversation. Anytime a conversation goes binary, where you're only given two options, there's no space for a win-win, right? It's either I win, you win, or we both lose, or we both don't have, it's neutral. You know what I'm saying? So we end up with nothing anyway.
Exactly. It's fundamental to any binary polarity conversation. It doesn't matter what it is. Mm-hmm. Like you're definitely not going to find a win-win from that mindset.
So when you look at things with the anti, I know you were cautious of that actual prefix.
Yeah.
So you want to get into anti a little bit?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
So the thing with anti, and this is, yeah, is that it's just really destructive on a lot of levels. So let's just say, and I'm just going to stick with sexism just to like avoid as much pushback as possible.
Mm-hmm.
So if I define myself as an anti-sexist,
Mm-hmm.
and that's my identity, then I need sexism to exist to have something to be anti, to have something to push against. So now I have a quantum entanglement with sexism, and I'm dependent upon sexism. And if I don't have sexism, if there's no sexism in the world, then I don't have existential validity, and I don't have a mission. So that's number one. So I mean, it's same with anti-sexist, anti-poverty, anti-racism, anti-whatever. Whatever anti is modifying only fuels and empowers that other thing, because we're also activating that frequency, right? So if
Mm-hmm.
I say, I'm for equality, we can all feel into that energetic. And there's the energy and the frequency of equality and whatever our own associations with equality are going to be. But
Mm-hmm.
if I say I'm anti, let's go with racism because that one just has more of a punch. If
Right.
I say I'm anti-racist, I've just activated the frequencies of racism, in my own body, which doesn't
Mm-hmm.
create a lot of joy or a lot of harmony. And I'm
Right.
activating that, in whoever's within earshot. And I'm also programming the quantum field, because this is a collective reality that we're all programming. So every thought, every word, and every action, they're all amalgamated to create what is known as our collective reality. So as I'm, talking about how I'm an anti-racist, then I
Mm-hmm.
continue to activate and call forth the frequencies of racism.
So let
But
me simplify what I think I heard.
mhm.
So what you're saying is by using the word that you're anti against, it brings up a frequency, and then the anti suppresses it. So you're saying don't even bring up that term to begin with to trigger that vibration, and you won't need the anti to attack it.
Exactly. And because the subconscious mind
Mm-hmm.
doesn't understand prefixes and suffixes. So it actually doesn't hear the anti. The anti might work on a superficial communication level, but
Right.
in terms of the subconscious mind, it's just saying racism, racism, racism. I mean, honestly, Mo, look at how much racial tension has increased and escalated since Black Lives Matter hit the
Uh,
scene.
exactly. But let's just go back. I want to go back to this the biological trigger or the energy that it creates when you say that word, because that's a neat trick. what you just exposed here, by you buying into say anti whatever followed fill in the blank, you're actually triggering that blank. And I'm reiterating this for the people out there. So really we should choose how we the terms that, and that's weird that you would say that, choose your own terms on how you would have these discussions. Don't buy into their terms. Like when you say anti-vax, you're making the vaccine the problem, which the
Exactly.
vaccine is not really the problem. It's you taking my choice away from me, or whoever chooses to use it or don't use it. So we have to reframe these discussions using the terms that we want to use.
Yes, and I really appreciate you slowing us down, Mo, and reiterating that, because it
Mm-hmm.
is that important. Anytime we speak a word, we
Mm-hmm.
are casting our vote for whatever it represents, for
Right.
that's existence in our reality. So, like before the 2016 election, when everyone was freaking out about 45,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have to follow the politics at all to know he was going to win, simply by how often I was hearing his name uttered. And just every time we uttered it, we're empowering that construct. We're empowering the existence of that thing. So you take it to something simple like anti-aging and
Right.
this whole anti-aging industry. I don't really get tripped up about that sort of stuff. But if I'm shopping, for a face cream and anti-aging, all it's doing is drawing my attention to the aging process and
Mm-hmm.
empowering the aging process and giving it more fuel in my life.
So what you're saying is, just to make sure we flesh this thing all the way out, the fact that when you see anti-aging, it triggers something in your brain. Then you start to worry about that problem, which actually creates the problem. And then they have a product to sell you for that.
Exactly. It's like the Hegelian dialectic in a marketing slogan.
Which, I mean, so ask this question. Can we hijack their tactics and use them for our own good? The reason why I ask this is like on Terminator, right? If you could get one of the Terminators and reprogram it, then you had that false multiplier for your side. Is that possible?
It is possible, absolutely. It's just a matter of us cluing into the techniques and not taking the bait. So like for every, for people listening who are of the mindset that you and I are in, to not ever identify as anti-vax or anti-mask or even anti-lockdown, because not only does it fuel and empower those things, but it also normalizes them as though anti-mask is not our default setting, and we're kind of the weird anomaly. So I think the key is to not play in and to not have the conversations on their terms. I'm free-faced. I'm not.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead. I'm never anti-mask. I just move around with a free face. I just don't not play into their terms and then all the trickery that they necessitate.
But you just triggered a thought when you said that, because you can't prove a negative. If you're like in the court of law, you can't prove that you didn't do something. You see what I'm saying? You only can prove that you could do it, or something wouldn't happen. So when you buy into this negativity kind of thing, the anti, you already are put on the defensive.
Exactly.
So I guess you have to parry that. But and I said before, we want to hijack their tactics. A better way to put that, because we can easily creep into witchcraft if we start to use their tactics just inversely. But what we want to do is neutralize their tactics. One, understand it, and then two, be able to neutralize their tactics. So I just want to clarify that for a minute, because somebody might, oh, well, you're trying to do the same thing with those. Who's to say who's right? Yes,
you're totally right. It's to neutral. I mean, the way I look at it is it's just to step out of their game entirely, like to not have the conversations on those terms and not play into the black-white polarities that like lead to triggers and lead to polarized thinking. So the key is to, I think, just not use their language. And then I also, just like you said with the Let's Go Brandon and how that's been co-opted in like and it's fun. Like anytime someone says it, like, don't you kind of laugh?
Right. And speaking of the right, I think this is where if you just look at the meme wars and the information war that's going on right now, the conservative right, or whatever you want to call that, like I said, we don't want to use labels, but someone that we use like Let's Go Brandon or enjoy that, they have the sense of humor. That's why I think they win on that platform. If you want to make it about sense of humor or making people laugh, it's kind of been this shift to where they're their new cool, right? I mean, like the stuffy intellectual is no longer the cool. All the things that associate what we thought with big time news stations, those kind of things, is not cool anymore. It's all about the small, independent little guy. The little guy's popular now, I guess how I'll put that.
Yeah, I think that's the case. I mean, it's all a little bit convoluted, because I see this whole the polarization of our entire nation is built on like trend and like what people think is cool, and this like kind of weird, almost teenage mentality, social status stuff. So it's all kind of like silly and a bit. I didn't realize we were this immature as a culture to fall for these tactics. I mean,
well, I think it's a conscious, like, I mean, the immaturity and the dumbing down, for lack of a word, is a conscious decision by whoever people on that side are the wordsmiths. Let's just use that word that concoct these terms up. They create these memes. You want the silly stuff. I mean, you don't want to read it. I mean, and I say you, the average person, they want to scroll up their Insta feed or whatever feed it is, read something that makes them laugh. They don't want to read a long paragraph about stacks and facts, right? I mean, stats and data. Excuse me. They want a headline. They want a 5-second or 10-second video that illustrates the humor, the satirical value of a situation. It's like I said. I think it's a strategic move. I don't think it's by accident that how the meme war is being played out and who's winning.
Oh yeah, it's not an accident at all. It's certainly by design, and it does seem that there's, and I mean, I feel like the left-right is very frustrating because a lot of times I'll hear a lot of really sane truths coming out of, people who are aligned with the right. And then, after making a very salient point, they'll say something like, but the liberals don't get it. And then I'm like, oh, why'd you have to take it there? Like, why did you have to go to the divisive place instead of just resting on the sane truth? That's really the point.
And when I'm talking about the little guy winning, like Joe America, that kind of person, we're seeing now who's really essential with how the COOF came along to say who's essential now, a truck driver or somebody that's a playwright on Broadway, right? Who's really essential now?
Right.
And so we're having this shift back from the intellectual phase that we kind of seen with ever since maybe Obama, because Clinton was not seen as an intellectual, right? You see these ebbs and flows of when intellectuality, if that's a word, is the cool, and I think we're out of that phase right now, and who's essential, who brings us our food, who works in the factory, that kind of thing. We're feeling that pinch now, and we could do less with this intellectual class. Because if you notice, even when they break down voting, it's like college voters and non-college voters. Like, when did that become a divide, right? So,
yeah, you're right. I hadn't thought about it, but I think my sense is that, 45 was a wild card that no one saw coming. And he was, a huge iconic presence on the scene, as he still is. And I wonder if the social engineers didn't catch on to like, oh, well, he seems to be appealing to the everyman. Let's kind of co-opt that. I mean, there's that piece of it. And then there's the reality of where we're at, where we're seeing who truly is essential and who truly does keep this country operational. And it's certainly not the people, like, as you said, like writing plays in their Manhattan high rises.
Right. Because they don't know the pulse. They don't have their finger on the pulse to see what time it is. And I'm pretty sure that they still think they can win this with their kind of media. And now that's not the case. I would like to point out something that happened there, that happened during the COOF, the Rona, was when you start to see people broadcasting from home on their laptop with their bad audio, it ruined the magic that the mainstream media had. Right? They had this big apparatus with these big screens, nice suits, everything's perfect. And then they had to shut the machine down and like kind of broadcast from home and made people look like, hey, you're just like me. Without all the gloss and glamour and limelight.
Yeah, it's true. It's like we've all seen behind the curtain. And I think it portends, the more and more of the fiction is falling away. I mean, there's certainly factions that are trying to cling to it, but I feel like that may have been sort of the entry into into the falling away of all of the fictions that we've been living as Americans. And, that might be the big one, is that like, no, it can, like I love Styx Hexenhammer, and he's just like, sometimes he'll do his broadcast in his bathrobe, staring at his computer. And I feel like this is higher quality news that I'm getting on any of the networks.
Right. And that's the thing with the big hit with fake news. It kind of ruined their brand to the point, and I think it's irreparable. And just not to get hung up on this too long, but I wanted to make one more point, that turning the system against itself. You're seeing this phenomenon now where people are making the most ridiculous claims. That way it generates a fact check. And like I said before, you can't disprove something. You can't prove a negative. And case in point with like Biden pooping his pants, no matter how silly that sounds, if you put it through the fact checker and then they have to actually fact check it, it disseminates the information even more.
Right.
So this is just an example of how the system is being played against itself, being hijacked against itself.
That's a great example, because you still have to talk about it to fact check it.
It's clever is always going to win. Clever is always going to win, and having a way of words is always going to be a great thing. Let's go to the live chat right quick. I know they're like, wait, you forgot about us. But and as I do that, I would like to remind people, go to your Amazon page and maybe pick up your books, at least one of them. Anything else you got going on besides these two that they should know about?
My new book, I just turned it in this morning. So like praying they don't censor it, that will likely be available next week. And that's called Pop Propaganda, an Illustrated Guide. Mm-hmm. So it's an illustrated guide to propaganda, modern propaganda. So I throw in some like fact checkers, or kind of a modern day propaganda arm that you're not going to find in like an old school Bernays book.
Okay. So, you said they, were you talking about a publisher or
no, Amazon, which I have mixed feelings about.
Well, hold on. Amazon. Well, that's news. You want to tell us? Well, I don't know if you want to talk about it. You not want to piss them off, but wow, that's
as far
interesting.
As Amazon censoring content,
right?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely heard horror stories, and I'm also a little bit traumatized from just being so censored, so hardcore. And, with the whole domestic terrorist bill and whatnot. So I have heard of Amazon taking different books down. I don't know. I'm praying mine makes the cut.
But that confuses me, because... And I mean, I understand that they're conscious of what they sell. I mean, a capitalist society, they have the right to sell or not sell what they want to sell. But to be able to, I guess, what they like give you a like an editor basically and say, hey, we redline these few things and you need to work on it. Is that kind of the thing, or is it just like a yes or no?
I think it would be like a hard rejection. But
okay.
I mean, that's just happening across the board. Like a friend of mine, because I do illustrations, so a friend of mine had asked me to design him a mask with a yellow star and a barcode on it, because where he works, he was the only one who had to wear one.
Right.
And 3 different companies turned it down and refused to print it, and said that one of them accused me of being a Holocaust denier.
Another way to discredit someone.
Yeah,
throw that term out there.
It's insane. I mean, it was completely insane. I'm like, I don't understand how you would make that leap from me trying to print this. But in the grand scheme of free speech, because I'm a free speech absolutist, if someone wants to deny the Holocaust, I'm going to defend their right to do that. Like, why is that our baseline for what a bad person is? So what if someone wants to deny the Holocaust? Who cares?
But I think they have these hard set facts that you have to agree with, just as checkpoints to see how controlled you are.
Exactly.
Right? It's okay, here's 5 things, quick check. What do you believe on this? The moon? Okay, check. The earth shape? Check.
Yeah, totally.
The Holocaust? Check. And and if you miss one of those, it's like automatically discredited.
Right, you're canceled.
You just kick them to the side.
Yeah, you're an
And
alt-right
not even
Nazi.
to the point of canceling you, because it's okay if you cancel me from your platforms. That's your choice.
Right.
But to actually try to cancel somebody from society as a whole and not to be heard, that's a whole different ball of wax.
Oh, completely. Completely. And that's just so out of control. Like it's really heartbreaking to witness this trend of dehumanization. I mean, even just seeing people's responses to the Rittenhouse trial, and I'm not really I try not to track the distractions that are just so obviously distractions. But I mean, to hear people making fun of him crying and white boy tears and this and that, it's just like so heartbreaking that there's the attempt to convince us that we don't all share human emotions. And then worse is to see people actually buying it and then demonizing their fellow humans. I don't know. It's just really painful to watch.
And to see, just to go back to and these are social media phenomenons, but they bleed over into reality, is the right is known for saying, oh, I'm drinking on liberal tears, that kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
You want to inspire some kind of reaction for someone with your harsh words, or it's only words really. But when the shoe is put on the other foot, then it's like, oh, respect his emotions. It's like, well, you can't have it both ways, and that goes to both sides, right?
Because it definitely goes to both sides, 100%.
Because you see it with the cancel culture, that is wielded normally by the left towards the right, but when it comes back, it's like, well, you got to have some understanding. They were in a different place in life, and it's like, hold on, well, how about everybody had that same compassion for everybody, and we might can get somewhere.
Exactly. And I also just feel like it muddies the playing field. Where can we just talk about the actual issues and the actual policies without demonizing either side in the middle, because it discounts any like valid points made when it goes to that gutter level of name calling and just rejecting people because of their political affiliations. It's so ridiculous.
I'm a little different in how I see that, because I'm from the point of just tell me what the rules are. As long as the rules are the rules and everybody's playing by the same rules, I have no issue with it. But it's when we don't have hard set rules, then it leaves up for legal ease, right? Well, in this condition, this degree, this scenario, that kind of thing. It's like, well, these are the rules. It's kind of like in football. This is out of bounds. If you go across this line, you're out of bounds. I mean, that's where we need to be at, or either have compassion, but you can't have, it's this very fluid situation that they want to put us in of it's circumstantial. It's like, well, this person was going through this right now and that justifies this action. It's like, well, okay, but is that the rule? Is that we're going to have compassion? Okay, well, let's go that way. But it's like, no, but we need to be staunch if somebody says these words or don't agree with that checklist I previously listed.
Yeah, it's true. It's like, we have a constitution. Let's just honor that. We have a Nuremberg Code. Let's just honor that. It's really simple. We don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Right. The longer the contract, the more problematic the contract.
There is that.
There's going to be some language in there that's going to get you. Okay, so I didn't see many questions from the live chat. I think we're going to rock out about maybe another 30 minutes. I don't want to.
One question that I saw, if I may, Mo, is that I saw someone ask if there was any scientific backing around the word anti, and I just wanted to refer him. There's a really great book written by two neuroscientists called Words Can Change Your Brain. Mm-hmm. And then there's another book called Power versus Force by Dr. David Hawkins. And both of those are great resources to get like a broader understanding of how an anti and any sort of like negative or oppositional languaging, how it's affecting the brain and the emotions.
And we've seen the study, which I don't know if it's been proven or not, but it's great propaganda, is the glass in the jar. I mean, the rice in the jar, and you speak one to it kindly with kind words and affirmations, and then you speak to the other one with harsh words and demeaning terms. And the one with the negative terms, mold it faster. Like I said, I don't know if it's factual, but the reason why I bring it up is it's a great representation of the power of language, I believe.
There's also, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, have you seen that? I was just going to ask, have you seen that?
I have seen that. I have seen that. And I think and there's also Dr. Emoto who does similar experiments with water. Mm-hmm. But, I before the lockdown, I was touring and I would do a lot of quantum languaging workshops. And at any quantum languaging workshop, when I bring up the there's generally some sort of like woke pushback. And whenever I get the pushback, I just have people close their eyes and just say a bunch of words out loud. Mm-hmm. And to just like, again, going back to anti-racism, but just, close your eyes and get really quiet and say the word racism and notice what emotions come up and what feelings come up in the body. Is that good? Is that a state that you want to cultivate? Is that a state that you want to continue to recreate in your life and in the world? Just on a really simple kind of analog level, we can have our own experience of these words and how they're programmed and how those programs affect us.
Okay, so let's get into a little, that's a great segue let's get into a little victimhood, and this term that, as I was listening to a previous interview of yours, a term popped in my head, empowered victim. So let's just start with victimhood and victim. You want to speak on those words or?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. So, from my perspective, one of the biggest problems that we're facing as a culture is that we've been convinced that there's value in victimhood. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden we have a culture where people are fighting to be the most oppressedest and like who has the harder time and like creating this hierarchy of victimhood. Like, well, this person's a bigger victim because of X, Y, Z. And so they should get more privileges. And it's just a giant scam because there is no value in victimhood. It might give us pity.
I'll push back against that.
Okay.
I'll push back against that because and respectfully so. Because that's where the term empowered victim came from. Because you were talking about empowerment in that term, and we can get into that a little later. But the powers that be, they, capital they.
Powers that were.
Huh? Say what?
The powers that were.
The powers that were. As we refer to them as they, with all caps.
Yep.
They empower people to be victims so they do actually have value in this new society. So they're actually, your currency is your victimhood.
Yes, in backwards clown world.
We're in an inverted world.
Exactly. Yeah, in inverted world, for sure. But does it translate to a life well lived? Does it translate to like us realizing our potential and us having a positive impact? And us living a life of abundance? Absolutely not.
Well, I'll respectfully push back because when I'm being contrarian here, I'm being the contrarian.
I love it.
Contrarian here because they would say, well, in this society, as we spoke before, how hard it is to socialize and it's so awkward for human contact and that kind of thing. It's either I accept this victimhood, which gives me an identity in this world and may also invite me to participate in other cult of that victim, of that victimhood, or I can be in isolation.
Again, so we have another false dichotomy that it's either or, right? You're either with us or you're against us. You either play the victim or you live a life of isolation. I'm saying
that's their reality. That's their reality. Because just think, if you go to work, no, I'm saying this to humanize them, the people that will push back against your anti.
Okay.
They'll say, well, I go to work and I go home and I go to work and I go home. Well, maybe if I hype up my sexuality as far as, that's my identity, or my race is my identity, or whatever, fill in the blank, right? Or a feminist is my identity, my gender as identity. It can put me into social circles now. Whereas before, I'm just a loner. And I think that they prey on these people as victims to say, hey, this is the real victimhood, is to say isolation or join one of our victimhood cults.
Yeah. Ooh, I love the term victimhood cult. Yeah, I mean, so the phrase empowered victim, I believe, is an oxymoron. I don't think
Mm-hmm.
there's like, I don't, you're either empowered or you're a victim. And I've yet to see or experience an actual melding of the two. But I understand there's clown world, and like
Mm-hmm.
we're being invited to participate into clown world, but clown world wouldn't exist and wouldn't have, like, this sham wouldn't have gotten this far if we were a culture comprised of humans with healthy self-esteem and healthy self-confidence and who knew ourselves as whole without these fake identity constructs to lean on as crutches because socializing seems too challenging otherwise, or to just be, cast out as a black sheep and learn from there. Okay, well, maybe there's a lesson in this, and I'll build my strength of character from an authentic place, and I don't have to play their games. But they're reliant, again, the capital they are reliant on us being a self-esteem deficient culture who will, compromise our truth and play the victim for social acceptance. But we're not going to live like the biggest, brightest lives that we came here to live if we play that game. We get to
Of
play
course
like
not.
little
Yeah.
slave lives.
Yeah, of course not. But this like you said, that's the false choice that they give you of be isolated or be join a victimhood cult. Which this is the result, I believe, of the destruction of the family, because family is where you used to get your identity, right? I'm so and so's son. I'm so and so's brother. I'm so and so's uncle. I'm so and so's cousin. You fill in all those blanks, but now with the total inversion of the family or the destruction of the family, that isolation is a real option. Not saying it's your only option, but then they say join this victimhood cult, which you truly are a victim, but you're a victim of the system that they created in the first place that causes the isolation. So it's like, okay, just identify your victimhood that you're actually feeling. Because I think these people do feel like victims. And I don't want to take that. I don't want to poo-poo that real feeling that they're having with misdiagnosing the source of it. It's not their sexuality. It's not their gender. It's not their race. It's I am isolated if I don't join these cults.
Exactly. I think that's a really important point, is that they are victims, but it isn't to any of the identity constructs. It's to the system.
Right, because if you say
It's the control matrix.
If somebody says, "Oh, well, you're not a victim. Look, you have a job and you eat every day and you have a roof over your head," you're demeaning what they're actually feeling. Because I just and I think this is compounded by the whole Rona situation. Is people are really isolated, like for real isolated. And I think that's why you saw the only way you got to come outside is when your cult was having a meeting.
It's true. I agree. And at the same time, like, I agree that we want to be compassionate for what people are feeling, but I don't think it does anyone any good to feed into victim mentality. Because the other piece is, like, when we're feeling sorry for ourselves as victims, we're also not in gratitude for all the blessings. We're not focusing our attention on, the abundance of our lives, or, the beauty of our family, or, those things. And that's, that gratitude and that shifting of the perspective to, like, what do I have to be grateful for? What is wonderful in my life? What are my gifts? Like, that's what lifts us out of victim consciousness. And if we're, for those of us who are, who can see a better future, who can see a better world, and who are determined to take the planet there, we cannot be in victim. That's not going to come from victim consciousness. That's going to come from a more empowered place. And at the same time, is like, yes, having compassion for where people are at. I don't want to enable anyone's victim consciousness, because I want people to know how powerful they are. And I want,
and you can be, and the word victim is a real hot button topic or term, because you can literally be a victim of a crime. Like, if you steal my car, I'm a victim of car theft. Now, that doesn't mean I live in that state. Just at that moment, you took my car. So if you try to come along to somebody and be like, "Hey, But if they're saying that 2 weeks from now, so I was a victim of a car. I'm a victim of a car theft. It's like, how long ago? It's like 2 weeks. Well, just get another car. You see what I'm saying? But you had that knowledge that they actually were something happened to them. That takes me into another lane. Is the being victim of self, and I want to talk a little bit about self-talk, because I think internal cues are maybe more harmful than the external.
I agree.
Cues.
I agree.
You want to elaborate a little bit on self-talk and maybe the impact of that, and then Ms. Raviola, we'll get to your question right after this piece right here.
Yeah, cool.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of people...
Wait. Let's just get this out of the way. I don't want to let that hang because it's about victimhood.
Yep.
And she says, please elaborate. I advocate for victims of domestic violence and child, S abuse and toxic relationships, intimate and non-intimate. How would she rephrase that statement?
I'm curious to know, Ms. Ravioli, like how...
if I'm guessing, I'm thinking about I advocate for victims of. How would you linguistically reshape that term, if I'm understanding your question correctly, Mr. Ravioli?
Yeah, so I personally don't recommend ever identifying as a victim of anything. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot more power in understanding where we've chosen to co-create certain dynamics in our lives. So I work with, I advocate for people who are, transmuting abusive relationship tendencies, who are transmuting victim perpetrator dynamics, mm-hmm. right? So I like to take sort of negative associations, and instead of merging them with the identity with personal pronouns or any mm-hmm. identifiers, to make them more impersonal. So it's like, I'm not if I tend to... I'm trying to think of a good example. Like, I don't have abandonment issues. I'm mm-hmm. transmuting some abandonment tendencies, or I'm transmuting relationship dynamics that have me feeling abandoned.
So how, because I know some people like, that's a mouthful.
I get it.
I know how people think. Could we use the word survivor in lieu of how victims used? Like, this happened to me, but I transcended it and moved past it. I'm asking that question.
Yeah, I mean, again, we're languaging the negative, right? So we're empowering it versus like, I'm learning how to relate from a place, of self-love or self-value. I'm learning to create relationships where where I feel safe and where I'm honored as safe. So, like, without overcomplicating it, all the quantum languaging upgrades are, what is the reality you're choosing to live into? Mm-hmm. And create an identity around that. Describe yourself around what the life that you're living into, not the life that you're leaving behind. So we're leaving behind experiences of abuse. We don't want to identify ourselves with that abuse and carry that with us. Like, I say the same to people who call themselves cancer survivors, and they're like, but I am. And I'm like, okay, was that a fun time? Does that, does that activate fun frequencies in your body? Or are you now, someone who's an embodiment of optimal health and wellness, where we're just like, been there, done that, no need to continue to identify that way. So I would frame it as like, I'm working with people who are learning to relate in, from a place of safety, who are calling in safe relationships, and in terms of an identifier. And this isn't to gloss over that process and what we've endured, but in terms of how we're identifying ourselves, I really steer clear of stapling any negativity to our identities, or how we're introducing ourselves to others, or how we're framing ourselves.
I think I've picked up the nuance in what you're saying is we could be a participant in an experience, but it shouldn't shape us to the point where we describe ourselves by our identity by it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. And it's not even a should, but it's just a matter of when we do, then we're disempowering ourselves to those experiences. We're continuing to allow ourselves be abused by those experiences.
Because even down to the sonic of saying certain things, you, like I said, you trigger those experiences all over again.
Exactly. It triggers the same trauma in the nervous system and in the psycho-emotional body.
Got you. But I would, I don't want to say push back, but I would say, as a believer, there's power in what they call testimony, to say, hey, I went through this, but there's brighter things on the other side of it. So that's a little gray area where it might fall into like, don't harp back on it. But if you're trying to reach somebody, just say if you're trying to wake them up to how how carelessly they use their words. Mm-hmm. You can say, I used to be there once too. You know, I used to be aware of what didn't come out of my mouth. But then here comes the but, to say, now that's not the case. So I just want to lay that out there, you know, of not to erase your experiences, because we learn from those and we grow from those, and they do shape how, I don't want to say who we become, because you made me cognizant of that, and you're right. It shapes how we perceive things, our perception, not our identity.
Exactly. And these are all things that go into our lives, right? And these are experiences we have, and we don't want to deny what happened, and we want to be able to relate. But it's, you know, I said earlier in this podcast, our mythology shape our culture in the same way our stories shape who we are. We get to write our stories. And when you look back, you know, I know you're 40. If you look back at your 40 years of life, if you're introducing yourself to someone, you're going to have to do some real quick editing to figure out how you want to present yourself to this new person. You get to write that story. You know, you get to decide, well, what bits and pieces do I want to pull out to give this person an idea of who I am now, and also to direct them how to relate to me now. And so that's where I'll recommend, write a story that makes you feel good. Write a superhero story for yourself. It's not to deny all the other pieces that went into it, but as far as like how we're leading with our forward-facing identity, it's just going to be most beneficial to lead with the positive stuff and all that we're choosing to live into.
But to seek first to understand, then to be understood. I didn't want to leave that off, but you got me conscious of my words now. So, and I mean, it's effective. Seek first to understand, then to be understood. There has to be a point where you, and we'll get more on an intimate level now of maybe your inner circle, that you need to bear some of that vulnerability so a person fully understands you, because couldn't we possibly get into the point where we create this alter ego if we just flower everything up? I asked that in good faith.
Oh yeah, I took it in a good way. And okay. Yes, absolutely. And I think it's a matter of know your audience, you know, and like when is it appropriate to share what with whom? Like I remember, you know, I was living in Los Angeles when the whole Me Too thing blew up, and all of a sudden it became a cultural trend to just like air your dirty laundry of like sexual traumas past. And I was at a friend's birthday party, and I was, you know, sitting at a table with some girlfriends, and a woman came to join us. And I had just met this woman, and like within the first 2 minutes, she mentioned like, you know, well, when I was 18, that was my first instance. And I didn't understand what she was talking about. And I was like, your first instance of what? And she was like, well, that was the first time I was raped. And I just thought like, I mean, from a place of compassion, I just thought, wow, we're at a birthday party. I don't really know this person. It's not necessary. Like, and also because trauma is so tender, right? And I feel like it's disrespectful to our trauma when we just kind of wave it around like a new fanny pack or something, you know, like it requires a little more restraint and understanding, you know, who it's safe to share with and who can really honor it and help us move through it in a way that's healthy for us. And I think a big part of victim culture that we're seeing now is people airing their trauma in this sort of reckless fashion that isn't really honoring of themselves and like those tender parts of themselves that are still inviting healing.
So let's war game this out. This woman that said this to you,
Mm-hmm.
and this is what I'm talking about: an empowered victim. The media has empowered her to use her victimhood to gain status in society.
Yep.
When she came to that table, she's like, "I'm throwing my big trump out. I'm a victim of this."
Yep.
And now the order has been set at that table. Like, who's going to top this? That's what I mean by the media. Media has empowered her to be a victim, and that's what I mean by empowered victimhood. Is that the media? And
I would say they cursed her. I would say the media cursed her.
Well, yeah, it depends on polarity. Because I'm talking from their aspect of it. They say,
Right.
We're going to use this. We're going to give you Me Too. And I think it's from a self-serving point because they know that Me Too is going to be such a problem from them. They're like, let's just blanket it everywhere. And then it becomes like Little Boy Who Cried Wolf. I think that's the strategy behind the over-victimization. It's like, let's if we can't use brakes, let's use gas. And let's just go full tilt. And look who got protected by it. It became so watered down a term that when you heard some of these big names come like, oh, yeah, I'm sure she just got her butt pinched at the office. Right? I mean, that they totally trivialized the term.
Yeah.
I think in a protective manner, if that makes sense. And when I'm talking about the mass media and the ruling elite and those kind of people. And go ahead.
Yeah, I mean the whole thing is kind of unfortunate because I feel like what it's done is it's taken, like, I think it's disrespectful to women or men as well who've really endured like real deal brutal sexual trauma versus like, you know, it's a gray area. I know Lena Dunham wrote an essay about it where it was like she willingly had sex with someone, but then she felt weird about it after. I don't know if that's the same thing as like being actually raped. I think go ahead.
No, that's exactly the point what I'm making is.
Yeah, it waters down. Like
it conflates this wide range of acts into a nice little hashtag that got trended at first, but then it got mocked later. And it's like, well, problem, reaction, solution, right? If we can't stop this thing from coming out, we can't, and we even saw the term Me Too get hijacked with the Oprah thing. She came out and strategically splintered to her by using Time's Up. So now you have this over-trivialization. We have this division of the term, and now it becomes an identity Boy Scout badge. Honor badge that you put on your sash to say, yeah, I'm a victim of sexual abuse.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can get clout for it.
Okay, you just gave me a great idea. We need to have those like brownie badges for different like realms of victimhood, the way we had with like Boy and Girl Scouts, because that's exactly what it is. And it's interesting that you brought up the Oprah thing because I mean, Me Too was an op. Let's straight up. There was nothing organic about that. It was a total op to divide us. But there was something about the Me Too phrase, which, okay, there was some sort of camaraderie about it. And it was as gross as it was.
The term itself. I mean, if you listen to the term, it's like you say, oh, I've been to Cabo. I was like, me too. It's like, it's longing for acceptance.
Exactly. It's just as stupid. It's the same as I'm with her. It's like, I belong. It's the exact same thing. But notice Time's Up. Time's Up just switch it to vindictive and punitive. Now it's about pointing outwards. And now it's about screw you, men. Do you see the flip and what that does in the mind? Now that one, Me Too is about us and I had a problem. Time's Up is about men are the enemy.
Which what they want to do is make a perfect divide.
Exactly.
The goal is not to say one side is right or wrong. It's like, let's throw terms out there that can have the perfect divide. That way nobody has any power and it keeps them distracted so we can do business as usual.
Yes, exactly. And
which Don Oliver Davis, another friend of the show, calls the worldview warfare. Basically, as long as you get sucked up in the argument, it doesn't matter which side you're on. As long as you get sucked up in the argument.
Exactly.
So I think we're right at the end of time. Anything else you want to put on the table before we wrap up here? Or hold on, let's get a couple. I don't want to hold you too long. Mr. Ravioli said, I completely disagree. Why can't the lady just be comfortable with her reality? I don't know what that was about. I thought it was a question to me. Excuse me. Anything else you want to put on the table before we wrap up this conversation?
No, we went to a bunch of different places. I had no idea we were going to go.
That's kind of how these conversations go. It's like you throw some stuff out on the table and just like kind of let it free flow. Promise me one thing, you'll come back?
Absolutely.
Okay. All
Yes.
right. So once again, I don't want to say Miss or Mrs. Dani Katz. I don't know how that goes.
I'm not fussy.
So what?
I'm not fussy with that stuff.
Okay. Yeah. In these times, you got to be careful with your words, as you wrote great books on, and you can find her 2 current books in the Amazon store, and your 3rd book is on its way. As long as Amazon didn't have any issues with it.
Yeah, fingers crossed it'll drop next week.
All right, and let's just give them your website one more time. Let me drop the banner one more time. That's Quantum Languaging, and once again, that's her name. Thank you for joining us on the channel, Facts Family. I'm sure they enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. You made me more conscious of my words. It was actually a practice going on in my brain to, okay, I don't want to say that. I want to say this. And I think that's the point of your book, correct?
It is. It's just to bring, I definitely don't want people to be, I don't want you to be uncomfortable or feel self-conscious, but it's definitely to invite people to be mindful of the words that we're using and to understand that every word really does have a massive effect on our reality. So to just choose them wisely.
I can't say anything better than that. But what I will say, as I always say, pay attention to everything and the truth will reveal itself. Thank you again, Dani, and y'all have a good night.
Thanks so much, Mo.
All right.